Hi everyone. I'm Josh Funk. I am a picture book author, but I'm also a software engineer. I've written a bunch of picture books. My first book was called Lady Pancake and Sir French Toast. I don't know if anyone's read it. And I have a few other ones too, but I recently wrote a book called How to Code a Santa, and it's about a little girl named Pearl and her robot Pascal, and the two of them use coding concepts to build a sandcastle. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I think one of the first things that I wanted to talk about what is a software engineer or a software developer. And it's basically somebody that writes code, but it doesn't mean that you have to just make things like code apps or code robots. There are lots of different things out there that require code. And pretty much everything in this world at this point requires some type of code or software. Like, for example, your car. Cars have lots and lots of computers on them that control how the car works, and they control how everything inside the car works, like the radio, but also how the engine and the steering and all of that stuff works. Your television, it has computer stuff in it. A lot of times with all the streaming video, all of that has coding involved on the back end. Also, a lot of sports. Sports have a lot of code that's involved, whether it's the websites that keep track of all the statistics, or how some people try to use statistics in sports for different things. Doctors, they use code. All of their equipment uses code. There are so many different types of code. Even librarians use code because libraries are managed, and to keep track of all of the books that are in libraries and all of the other types of media, code is involved in all of them. So I just wanted to, so if you are interested in coding, it doesn't mean that you are just going to sit there and make apps for a phone or make a robot move. There are loads and loads of different kinds of things that you can do with coding. I actually work as my day job. I'm taking my lunch break right now to hang out with you guys. It's the best part of my week, by the way. So my day job that I do is I write code that helps with the way that networks work, so how your cell phone works, but not the phone itself. It's how the phone talks to other phones, and how the internet works, and how radios work, and things like that. So that is what I do when I'm writing code during the day. So I wrote this book. It's called How to Code a Sandcastle. Now, does anyone know what a sequence is? Has anyone heard about sequences? So in How to Code a Sandcastle, Pearl and Pascal, it's the last day of summer vacation. And I'm not going to read the whole book because we're recording this and it's copyrighted and everything. But it's the last day of summer vacation. And Pearl and Pascal, they really, really want to build a sandcastle. But every day they've been thwarted by something. So first it was the flying saucers. And then it was the shark attack. And then eventually it was the moat that Ada Puglace added. So you can probably guess what that moat was. But this time she brought her trusty rust-proof robot, Pascal. And once they find a spot on the beach that they want to build, they create a sequence to fill the spot. The sequence is 1, fill the pail with sand. Let's see. 2, dump the sand on their spot. And 3, pat the sand down. And then that is their sequence, but they actually have to repeat that sequence. So not only do they use sequences, but has anyone ever heard of something called a loop? Has anyone ever heard of a loop before? Yeah, you use a loop when you need to repeat something. So they put that entire sequence inside of a loop. And they repeated that until they had a pile big enough for a sandcastle. Now, has anyone ever used something called an if-then-else? Or a conditional? That's kind of a fancy word. Well, when they were trying to find decorations, Pascal brought a lot of bad decorations back. First, he brought something that was way too big. Then he brought something that was alive. You can see there. And then he brought something that wasn't theirs. It was a baby's pacifier. And so they used an if-then-else to solve that. They said, if the item is small and doesn't move and doesn't belong to anyone, then bring the item back to the castle. Else, find something different. And so, as you can see, everyday life can often be a lot like coding. And I think that a lot of the decisions that you make, they could be like if-then-elses. Or the routines that you do every day, like you get up, you brush your teeth, you put on clothes, then you go have breakfast, and then you go to school. Like that is a sequence of things. And pretty much all of life can be broken down into and looked at like it was coding. And similarly, a lot of coding things can be broken down into things that seem like everyday life. So that is my book, How to Code a Sandcastle. And I am an author, but I also do coding for a day job. And I thought that I would open it up to you guys to see if there are any questions that you had about being an author and a software engineer. Two things that may seem totally different. Like I like the math and science of being a software engineer, and I like reading and writing of books. Guess what? You can do it all. You don't have to pick one or the other. So yeah. Anyway, if there's questions, if you guys want to take yourself off mute, I'm not sure the best way to do it. You could also type it into the chat. Works best. But I would love to hear from you guys and see what you guys think.
Actually, it would be really nice to hear from the kids. So,
I agree. Yes. Let's hear from some kids. So
if you have a question, okay.
Oh, here we go.
Hi. This is Josiah. It's a little dark in here, so.
It's okay. I can see. Hi, Josiah.
Do you like coding for like a living?
Do I like coding for a living? You know, I would say that coding is a lot of fun to do. And there are so many different kinds of things you can do with coding. So I've been doing my kind of coding where I work on making networks better for a really long time, and I've gotten pretty good at it. And so I really enjoy doing that kind of thing. But there are so many different types of coding that you can do. A lot of it starts out like you build a video game, or you could make your own adventure, or kind of things like that. But yeah, coding is something that you can really take it in any direction that you want. So for a day job, it's a pretty fun day job. And you know what's my favorite thing about coding? And maybe some of you have experienced this. It's when you write all this code, and it seems like it's a foreign language, or it is a language. I mean, coding is written in different languages. But you put all these words and symbols together, and then you hit enter, and you say, go, run. And then it does what it's supposed to do. That is like the coolest thing ever. Like, you say, okay, I want to make this robot go in a square. And then you hit go. And then it rolls in a square, and you see it do that. That is like the coolest thing ever. And you know, a lot of times there's a lot of trial and error involved with coding, as maybe some of you have experienced. You almost never get it right the first time. Yeah. And it's just like when you write a book. I don't know if there are any writers in the room, but when you're writing, you might do a first draft, but then you'll edit it and you'll do a second draft and make it better. And then you'll get a third draft, and eventually you'll do a final draft. Coding is very similar. You might put your code together and you think, it's going to do great. It's going to go in a circle. And then you realize it goes in a zigzag and or a square, and it goes in a zigzag. And you thought it was supposed to do something different. And then you look back at your code, and we do what's called debugging. That means you're removing the bugs. And so that is, it takes sometimes it takes more than one draft or one attempt at coding to get things to work properly. And it always does in my case. I mean, you don't write the code perfect right off the bat, ever. It's not what happens. Just like a first draft is not perfect, ever. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Is coding sometimes serious?
Go in front of the computer.
Is coding sometimes serious?
Yes.
Yeah. Coding can be serious. It really depends on what you're doing. But I took a course in college. I didn't actually start coding until I was in college. So you guys are so super lucky that you guys get to code in elementary school. Not everyone gets to do this. Even today, when we have the opportunities, you're very lucky because not all the schools around the country and the world get to code at ages in 1st through 4th grade, or even in high school. So I didn't really start coding until college. But one of the classes I took, we talked about how there are some serious things with coding. Like if you're coding something that's supposed to work with an airplane, or that's supposed to work with medical equipment. If you make a mistake and you move a 0 over from one place to the next, and it might do 100 times or 10 times as much as you were supposed to do. Like, for example, if you had an X-ray machine. Let's say an X-ray machine was supposed to be used, and it takes an X-ray of your leg, but all of a sudden the X-ray machine shot out X-rays at 100 times what it was supposed to be. Now, you might think that would be the beginning of a good superhero story, and maybe it would. However, it could actually be kind of serious. So that is why there's a lot of testing that's done with code. And usually it's done by different people. So it's kind of like how you have a first draft, and you might share your work with somebody else. So once you think your code is done, you might have a whole nother person go and test your code to make sure it does what it's supposed to do. Because sometimes there are serious things that get involved with code. But that would be way, way down the line. Right now, I don't think you're coding actual airplanes. Although you probably could code like little mini airplanes to go and do certain things. I bet there's programs that allow you to do that. But yeah, so good question.
Did you like coding when you started to do it?
Yeah, I say I didn't start coding until college, but I actually did a little bit of coding in high school, but I didn't really think of it as coding. We had graphing calculators, and so you could actually make any programs that you wanted, and it was doing some fancy science, but we were just putting formulas in, and basically there was a formula that we kept using, and I was like, oh, I'm so tired of saying this times that plus this to the power of 2, blah, blah, blah. And so I made a little formula, and I saved it on my graphing calculator. So all I would have to do is say, okay, I'm saying formula. I put in the formula, and I said A and B, and it would give me the answer. And so that was coding. And I think coding is super cool, too, because that is the reason why it's cool. You make shortcuts for yourself. Like, there's no reason to have to repeat something 100 times when you could just type it once and then say, repeat 100 times. And then you only need 2 lines of code to do that instead of 100 lines. So, yeah, I think that I have always liked coding since the beginning. And there's a lot of fancy tricks that you can learn along the way, but coding is ultimately, it's just fun. And I think that is, at your age, for sure, that's all you need to do is have fun with coding. See all the cool things that you can do and shortcuts that you can make and secrets you can come up with. Oh, I see WUTAI has a question.
What's your favorite part of coding?
My favorite part of coding. That's a good. So I don't know how coding is taught. Like as far, are there different stages of coding that you guys usually go through? Like the first is like a design stage, and then maybe there's like an implementation stage, and then there's a testing stage. Is that kind of how you guys do it? Is there some set structure, an order? I don't.
Yeah.
Or it's okay if there isn't. I mean, I think honestly, we're at this point in teaching right now where there are so many different ways to teach coding, and there's not really one agreed upon way. And I think that most of the ways that coding is taught to kids is very similar, because being a software engineering code, doing anything with a scientific process, it's got a similar flow to it. But I think my favorite part of coding is when you are, I don't want to say testing, but when you finish that piece of code and you finish whatever that program is and you hit run, and hopefully it works. I don't know. I'm always superstitious, and I cross my fingers before I run. And I hit run, and hopefully it works. And when it works, that is my favorite part. When it works. And then even when it doesn't work, you may have to test it for a while. Sometimes it takes hours and hours to figure out what went wrong or what isn't working. And sometimes you never figure it out. But for the most part, I think my favorite part of coding is that, I am going to hit run and go and see if it works. That anticipation and excitement. Yeah. Oh, I see Patricia has one. Oh, yeah. No, sorry. Oh, her name is Varna.
Hi.
Hi.
Why did you make the book?
Why did I write the book? You know what? I wrote How to Code a Sandcastle. The reason I wrote it was because there really aren't very many picture books that are about coding. There are a few, and I didn't love some of them, and I thought that there had to be a way to talk about coding in a way that first graders, kindergartners could understand it. Anyone in elementary school, or even my wife, who's a teacher. She teaches social studies, but she doesn't do any coding. So it took a really long time to figure out how to boil it down into a concept that really made sense to anybody, whether you know coding or not. And the first attempt that I had was way, way too complicated. And I shared it with writer friends of mine, and they were like, I don't understand any of this. It doesn't make any sense. And it was like, there was this magical world where a brother and sister got transported into a screen, and they met somebody who was like Arnie the pointer. And there were all these inside jokes about coding things that I don't think anybody really would understand unless they were already an engineer. And so I scrapped that one. And then I tried another attempt where it was about a boy and a girl, a brother and sister, and they were going to an amusement park, and they were trying to ride roller coasters, and they had a certain number of tokens, and they were going back and forth and trying to do all this different stuff, and it still was too complicated for most people to understand, my adult writer friends. And then I thought, okay, what if I just take something really that everyone knows how to do? Everyone knows how to build a sandcastle or how to build something with blocks. I mean, everyone knows how to build things. So what if I did that? If I took that and made it a how-to book? And that was really when everything started to click, was making it a how-to book. And so getting a sequence involved and then a loop and some basic things that really were kind of everyday life things that anybody can understand. And that was when I decided to that was when it finally started working. It took me about a year and a half before I even kind of figured out how to write How to Code a Sandcastle.
Okay.
It took a pretty long time.
That's called being persistent.
Yes, I was persistent. My agent knew I was a software engineer and thought that somebody should do this, and there was interest from some publishers, and I thought, yeah, I definitely should be able to, but it took a while. But good news, you can also, just like, spoiler alert, at the end of this book, when a big wave comes and knocks down their sandcastle, they reuse their code to find a new place to build and gather up sand and shape and decorate the castle, and then eventually use another loop to build a moat. They reuse their code. I am going to be able to reuse the second version where Pearl and Pascal are the brother and sister are now Pearl and Pascal going to an amusement park, and the book is called How to Code a Roller Coaster. And that one's not out yet, but it will be coming out in next September, and I think in that one, Pearl and Pascal will use variables. So they use variables as they go through an amusement park. And cool thing about variables, they could be something like a number, or like a number of tokens that they're going around the park and that they have, and they need to have enough to spend. But it could also be something like the flavor of ice cream that they want. That is variable. And a variable is really anything that can change, anything that has a value. And can change. So it could be a number, it could be a letter, it could be a flavor. There are lots of different things that could be variables. But yeah, so that book, it's coming out soon. We should hopefully have a cover for it, which will look similar to this, but with a roller coaster, coming in the next couple of months. But yeah, that one comes out. As of right now, I'm told it's coming out in September, but these things in publishing change. So cool. Who's got more questions?
Right.
Ooh, has anyone from Chris's class asked?
Go ahead, Liam.
What do you do more often, like write books or code?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I spend my day job during the days from about 9 to 5, except for lunch breaks like this, do it writing code. And then I spend a lot of time in the evenings and weekends writing books and doing that kind of thing. So I would say it's probably about 50-50. But yeah, I think that I really enjoy both. So I'm not going to switch and start just writing books anytime soon. Maybe someday, but for now, I still like coding a lot, and I have fun with it. So I'm kind of going to do both, and that's how I feel. Yeah. Good question. Has any classes not asked a question yet?
No, but I see Mrs. Shriver's
Oh,
class
yes,
has
Mrs.
a little
Shriver.
boy who's been standing there. So would you mind going?
Yeah.
How many things do you program, and why did you make the book?
How many things do I program? What do you mean? What do you mean by make people?
No, and why did you? How many things do you program?
How many things do I program? Well, so I write in several different programming languages. So I use something called C and C++, and I usually just program on computers, and I don't program robots or anything like that. I write code that sort of sits in the background and does things that you don't really see, but it helps the internet move faster. That's the kind of code that I write. So not all the code that you see is like on some fancy billboard or on some fancy robot, but a lot of times code is there. In some ways, code is a lot like a utility. I don't know if you know what utilities are, but it's something like getting your water to work, like having plumbing, you know, if your toilet were overflowing, you'd probably call a plumber, right? Well, if your internet at home is not working, at this point, someone has to be there to help fix that. Now, I'm not the person that would go to your house like a plumber would to fix the internet, but I'm someone who helps keep the internet running in the background, if that makes sense.
And Mrs. Eisenhardt's class, I don't think had anyone ask a question yet.
Ooh, let's go.
Go ahead, Taryn.
How do you
Speak up, bud.
how do you get an iPad to? How do you code an iPad to read a QR code? Right.
Oh, that is a very specific question that I'm gonna be honest, I don't know the answer to that. I've never coded on an iPad before. However, I would say this, that once you know how to code and you know the general concepts of coding, you can probably pick up lots of different languages, because just like, you know, I don't know if anyone's done geometry yet, but the area of a circle is always going to be pi r squared. Just like that, you will always need loops and sequences and variables in whatever coding language that you're using. So learning, just like it's actually similar to spoken languages. Every language, for the most part, probably has nouns and adjectives and verbs. Well, but they may be used differently in different languages. Well, it's the same thing with coding languages. They all have the same, I don't want to say parts of speech, but they have the same parts of coding. So as far as how to get a QR code to be read, that I don't know the answer to specifically, but I do know that if I were to do it, I would probably just try to find an app to do it and download it myself. Just because you know how to code one thing doesn't mean you automatically know how to code everything. But it means that if I really wanted to dive in and learn how to code something else, I probably could figure it out, because I've worked on lots of different languages over time. So.
Now, Josh, I know that it's just about time. Our time is just about up, and
Okay, I have a few more minutes if you want.
Are you sure?
Yeah,
Okay, so I know
absolutely.
this is your lunch break.
No, please. It's a special
Okay.
week. Let's keep taking questions.
Okay, I'm not sure. Then Miss
Varnauskas, hi.
Varnauskas, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Go ahead, Lily.
How many books have you written that involves like coding?
So I have written 9 books have been published, but only one of them right now is about coding. And I will have a second one, How to Code a Roller Coaster, and hopefully more that are about coding. You know, I've written a lot of books that haven't been published too. A lot of times when you write a first draft, and maybe people like it, maybe people don't. And sometimes I've probably written like 100 books, and a bunch of them have involved coding. Like I told you, I had other drafts of completely different books that had coding in it. But this is really the only one. This is the only one that I felt really good about, that I thought was worth being published. So yeah, right now I have 1 book, but there will be at least 1 more coming next fall. So at the beginning of next school year. There are some other really good books about coding. I don't know if anyone's read Secret Coders by Jean Lung Yang. And that one is a graphic novel. That one is really, really, some of you have read that one. Yeah, those are super fun. I really, really like those ones.
Thank you. And Mrs. Mummert, I think you only had one child ask a question so far. Did she have to go? I know that she was going to lunch pretty soon. Go ahead, Mrs. Mummert.
What was one of your favorite books that you wrote?
Oh, my favorite book that I wrote. Oh, that's a tough question. That's like asking me which of my kids is my favorite. It's my daughter, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. It's my son. Well, honestly, my favorite book that I've written is probably whatever book I'm going to write later today. Because you know what? I wrote this book, How to Code a Sandcastle. It's been out for, I think it came out in June. So it's been out for, 6 months, let's say. So I wrote this book probably 2 years earlier because it takes a long time for a book to come out. So I wrote this book 2.5 years ago. So whatever book even How to Code a Roller Coaster, which doesn't come out till September, I wrote that book 1.5 years ago. So my favorite book is going to be whatever I'm going to write today, because I'm a better writer today than I was 2.5 years ago when I wrote this, and 1.5 years ago when I wrote How to Code a Roller Coaster.
Thank you. And Mrs. Eisenhart, do you have one more that we could do?
Go ahead.
Do you guys make codes at your house?
Do I write code at my house? So I have 2 kids. They're in 5th grade and 8th grade. And my daughter has done a lot of, she did last year, I forget what it was called. It was a Choose Your Own Adventure, Twinery, I think. And it was a lot of fun. It was you could write a story and then make decisions based on that story. And then that would take you in different directions, and the story would continue depending on what decision you made. And so there was some code there that she used. I think it was called Twinery. And so she did some of that. My son lately has been doing some code on, he's been doing some code modules on one of the websites that he's been doing, I think Khan Academy. So that's the code that my kids have been doing. But I don't do too much code with them. They do code on their own when they want to, and they like to read and do a lot of that when they want to. And if they someday want to learn more about code, I'd be happy to work with them. But for right now, I kind of let them I like them to just enjoy learning whatever they want to learn.
Thank you.
And we have time just for one more.
All right, one more question.
What?
Go ahead.
Can you explain better what a bug is?
What a bug is. So a bug, okay, I don't know for sure about this. You should all, if you haven't read, Lori Walmark has a book called Grace Hopper, Queen of Computer Code. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that the term bug came because there was once a moth that got stuck back 60, 70 years ago when computers were really huge. And they took up entire rooms because they hadn't figured out how to make them small onto a small phone like this. There was a problem with one of the computers, and I think the problem was that there was a moth flying around in the computer, or got stuck in one of the computers. And that, it may just be an urban legend, but that I think is where the term bug came from. But a bug today usually just means that something's wrong. Something's wrong with the code. It doesn't work. It crashes. When we say crash, it doesn't mean that like 2 things actually crashed into each other, but it crashes like the program itself just died. It stopped working. And a bug is something that is causing it to not work right. Sometimes the bug might cause it to crash. Sometimes the bug, and maybe you've even seen this in apps or even in video games that you've played, a bug might cause something to, it's not that it crashes, but it causes the colors to look wrong, or it adds things up improperly. And that would be a bug. Anytime that there is something that isn't quite correct in code is a bug. So
I think a lot of kids call it glitchy.
Glitchy, all right.
So that's usually when there's a bug.
Yeah.
I know that there are a lot of other kids that have questions, and you could go for a really long time.
Probably.
But what I'm going to ask, if you do have any burning questions, if you could please email me, and then if I can send them to you, Josh, would that be okay?
Yeah, or, you could tweet them to me. If you tweet them to me, that might be the best way, because that way I can respond and everyone can see.
I think that would be awesome.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you spending your lunchtime with us today. And I know you don't want to hear us all say thank you. That would be really loud. So if we could please wave, give him a thumbs up, let him know that we are appreciative of him.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for inviting me into your schools today. And